The forgotten melody. The rain had not stopped all morning. It tapped gently on the dusty windows of the small-town library, where silence had long become a friend to Margaret. She sat in her usual corner, her thin fingers resting on the cover of a worn-out book she had read at least 10 times. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her thick shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. To many, Margaret was just the old woman who wandered into the library every day. No one really noticed her. No one asked questions. She was like the furniture, always there but forgotten. But behind those soft, wrinkled eyes lived stories no one had heard in decades, stories of a past filled with music, light, and applause. Once upon a time, Margaret had been someone whose voice could make people weep, whose songs made strangers hold hands and sway. But life had a way of stealing things quietly. First her husband, then her son, and finally, her reason to sing. Years had passed like pages in the wind, and now she was just Margaret, the old woman who hummed to herself in the library, who smiled politely but never spoke unless spoken to. Margaret, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up and saw Lily, the young librarian with bright eyes and too many questions. "Yes, dear?" Margaret replied softly. "I was wondering, have you heard about the town's talent show next week? It's for charity. Everyone is either performing or volunteering. Even Mr. Halter is doing stand-up comedy." Margaret smiled. "Mr. Halter, the same man who reads war history aloud to himself?" Lily laughed. "Yes, exactly him. That's why it'll be a show no one will forget." Margaret chuckled, but then quickly looked away. The idea of performing stirred something inside her, something she had buried long ago. Lily seemed to sense it. "You should come. Not to perform, of course, unless you want to, but just to watch. It'll be good for you." Margaret nodded. "I'll think about it." But she already knew. She wouldn't go. Crowds made her anxious now. And besides, what would she even do there? As the week rolled on, the town buzzed with excitement. The community center was cleaned for the first time in years. Flyers were everywhere, on shop windows, telephone, poles, and tucked into library books. Children practiced dances in parks. Teenagers rehearsed magic tricks, and everyone waited for Saturday night. Everyone except Margaret. On Friday afternoon, Margaret walked into the library as usual. But this time, something was different. There was a piano sitting near the back wall. It was old, with chipped keys and a cracked bench, but it was beautiful. Her breath caught. For a moment she just stood there staring. Then without thinking, she walked over and gently touched the keys. A soft note echoed through the library. "Do you play?" Lily asked from behind. Margaret froze. "A little," she said quickly, pulling her hand away. "We borrowed it for the talent show. Thought it might inspire someone." Lily smiled. "You're welcome to play any time. The library's quieter than usual during this time of day." Margaret said nothing, but that night, she couldn't sleep. Memories flooded her. She saw herself in her 20s, standing in a white dress on a small stage, her voice filling the air, her husband watching from the front row with proud eyes. She saw her son clapping wildly after each song. She remembered how alive she used to feel. The next day, she returned to the library early. Lily wasn't there yet. The building was silent. She walked straight to the piano, sat down, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. Her first note was hesitant, her second, smoother, and by the third, something inside her unlocked. The melody rose, quiet but confident, a song from long ago. Her voice followed, not loud, not bold, but full of soul. It was like breathing again after years underwater. What she didn't know was that Lily had arrived early too, and she was standing in the doorway, holding her breath, tears in her eyes. Word spread faster than Margaret could imagine. By lunchtime, everyone at the library was whispering about the old woman with the voice of an angel. Some thought it was a rumor, others were curious. But one group of teenagers, led by a boy named Derek, had a different idea. "What if we sign her up for the talent show?" He laughed. "She won't know until she's already on the list." But that's cruel, said one girl, frowning. Come on, it'll be funny. She won't even go up on stage, she'll just run off or cry. Either way, we get a moment to remember. They all laughed, and just like that, Margaret's name was added to the roster. Under singer Margaret. Saturday arrived with unexpected sunshine. The town was glowing with excitement. The community center was packed. Folding chairs lined the room. Children ran around with glitter on their faces and nervous performers adjusted costumes behind the curtains. Margaret sat in the last row, hidden beneath her shawl, watching quietly. She had told Lily she only came to support, nothing more. But then the host stepped on stage and tapped the microphone. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. We have a wonderful lineup, from dancers to magicians to singers. And speaking of singers, he glanced at the paper in his hand, confused. Please welcome Margaret. Margaret blinked. Margaret, the host repeated, scanning the room. Is Margaret here? People turned their heads. Whispers started. Who's Margaret? Isn't that the old woman from the library? Lily turned to Margaret, eyes wide. You didn't sign up. Margaret shook her head slowly. Derek and his friends snickered from the side. They were already recording on their phones, waiting to capture the humiliation. Margaret stood slowly. The whole room watched as she stepped out of the shadows and walked down the aisle. Every step felt heavier than the last. She reached the stage. Her heart was pounding. She looked out at the sea of faces, some amused, some confused, some waiting for a moment they could laugh about later. The microphone stood like a challenge in front of her. She closed her eyes, and then something strange happened. She remembered her husband's words. No one can take away your song, Margaret, not even time. She took a deep breath, and then she sang. The voice they never expected. For a few moments there was silence. No one laughed, no one spoke, no one even moved. The voice that came from Margaret was not loud or showy. It wasn't the voice of a pop star or a trained professional. But it was something else, something pure, raw, ancient and timeless. Her voice trembled, slightly at first like old parchment, but then steadied, carrying a depth only time could give. It floated across the stage, slipped between folding chairs and settled into the hearts of everyone who had come expecting a night of small-town fun and harmless jokes. Her song was an old lullaby, soft and haunting, filled with sadness and hope. The kind of song that felt like a story, the kind that made you remember things you thought you had forgotten. Children stopped fidgeting. Parents who had been scrolling on their phones lowered them slowly. Even the teens, Derek and his friends, stopped filming. Margaret wasn't singing to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just being. And that honesty, that stillness, held the room like a gentle storm. When she sang the final note, her eyes stayed closed. It echoed in the quiet room. Then someone stood up. Clap. Another joined clap, clap. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet. A standing ovation. Children were clapping, adults wiping their eyes. Even the host seemed speechless. Margaret opened her eyes, stunned. It was as if she had been pulled from a dream. For a moment, she didn't understand what was happening. Then she saw Lily in the crowd, her hands clapping above her head, tears running freely down her face. Margaret stepped away from the microphone slowly, overwhelmed, unsure of what she had done to deserve this reaction. As she made her way back down the aisle, people reached out to her, smiling, nodding, whispering thank yous. Someone touched her shoulder. Someone else squeezed her hand. For a woman who had lived years in silence, the sudden attention felt like thunder. Behind the stage curtain, Derek was pacing. His phone still held the recording. He hadn't stopped it, even though his prank hadn't gone as expected. In fact, he hadn't even laughed. Something in him felt strange, twisted up. It was like guilt, but heavier. His friends were quiet too. Did you see the way everyone stood up? One of them finally said. I thought it was supposed to be funny. Another mumbled. Derek didn't answer. He just stared at his screen, where Margaret's performance was still playing. He watched it again, and each time, something inside him hurt more. Later that evening, the show ended, but the town didn't leave the same way they came. People were quieter, kinder. Strangers held doors for each other. A few even talked about how maybe they had been judging others too quickly. Margaret stood outside the community center, watching the stars appear in the sky. She hadn't expected this. She had thought they would laugh at her. That they would see an old woman fumbling with memories and ignore her like everyone else had for years. But they had listened. They had heard her, and that meant more than anything. "Margaret," Lily called out, running over. "I'm so proud of you. You were incredible." "I don't know what happened," Margaret said softly, shaking her head. I heard the music in my heart again. I didn't mean to sing, not like that." "You didn't mean to," Lily smiled. "But you needed to." Margaret smiled faintly. "Maybe I did. People are asking about you. The mayor wants to meet you tomorrow. The town paper's editor asked me if they could do a feature on you for next week's issue." Margaret's eyes widened. "A feature?" "Yes. And not just that. There's something else." Lily hesitated. "Do you remember that music school that closed down years ago? The one on Pine Street?" Margaret nodded slowly. "They're reopening it as a community arts center. And they want someone with experience to lead the choir." Margaret blinked. "Me?" "Yes." Margaret laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign even to her. "I haven't led a choir in over 30 years. Maybe that's why you should," Lily said. "You haven't forgotten the music. We all heard that tonight." But not everyone was celebrating. In a corner of the community center parking lot, Derek sat in his car, the video playing again on loop. He scrolled through the comments. He had posted the video online during intermission, hoping to go viral for exposing an awkward moment. But instead, it had taken a different turn. This woman's voice healed something inside me. My grandma used to sing this lullaby. I'm crying. I haven't felt this moved in years. Who is she? More comments. Thousands. The video was already spreading fast. He had meant it as a joke, but it had become a miracle. And Derek felt like a fool. Margaret returned home late that night. Her small house was quiet, filled with shadows and dust, but it didn't feel so empty anymore. She sat by the window with a cup of tea and stared into the night, humming the lullaby she had sung on stage. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like just an old woman. She felt like a person again. She didn't notice the knock at her door until the second time. "Just a minute," she said, rising slowly and opening it. Derek stood there. His eyes were red, his phone in his hand. I need to talk to you," he said quietly. Margaret frowned. "Derek, right? From the library?" "Yes. What brings you here at this hour?" He looked down, ashamed. I was the one who signed you up for the show. As a joke." Margaret didn't speak. She just looked at him. Her face gave nothing away. "I thought it would be funny," he continued, his voice breaking. "But when you started singing, I don't know what happened. It was like everything stopped. And I realized how wrong I was. I'm sorry. Truly." Margaret looked at him for a long time. Then, gently, she opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, Derek sat on the edge of the couch while Margaret poured him a cup of tea. The room was filled with soft humming again. "You made a mistake," Margaret said, sitting across from him. "But you also gave me something I didn't know. I needed." Derek looked up. "You gave me the stage," she said. "I never would have taken it myself." He didn't know what to say. "So maybe your prank was a blessing in disguise," she continued. "But it's what you do next that matters most." Derek nodded. "I want to help. I want to do something, anything." Margaret smiled. "Then, start by listening. To people. To their stories. Not just the loud ones. Sometimes the quietest voices are the ones we need most." The next morning, the video had passed 1 million views. Reporters started calling. Music organizations reached out. Offers came in. But Margaret stayed grounded. She walked to the library like always, greeted Lily with a smile, and when a young mother brought her daughter in and asked if Margaret could teach her to sing, Margaret knelt down, smiled at the little girl, and said, "Let's begin with a hum." She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't trying to impress the world. She just wanted to keep the music alive. But somewhere, in a shiny office far away, a woman in a dark blazer sat watching Margaret's video on repeat. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply closed her laptop slowly, then picked up her phone. "Find her," she said. "I think we have something special on our hands." Echoes through the silence. The sun rose slowly over the town, painting everything in soft gold. It was Sunday, and the streets were still. But inside Margaret's small house, something had changed. Her phone, which used to ring maybe once a week, usually a scam call, now buzzed almost every few minutes. Calls from newspapers, from online magazines, from radio stations and music networks. People who hadn't heard her name in decades now wanted to talk to her, and all because she sang a lullaby on stage. Margaret didn't know what to do with all of it. She wasn't used to being seen. For so long, she had lived in the quiet spaces unnoticed and undisturbed. Attention, even the kind that came with praise, felt unfamiliar. She wasn't looking to become a celebrity. She only wanted to feel useful again. To feel like her voice still had a place in this world. As she sat at her kitchen table, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold, she stared out the window at the garden she'd forgotten to care for, overgrown bushes, crooked stones. And yet in the middle of it, a single flower had bloomed, unexpected and bright. That flower reminded her of something, or maybe someone. At the library, Lily had printed out the town's newspaper front page. Voice of Gold, the mystery woman who left the town speechless. Margaret's picture was in black and white, but her expression said it all. Humble, unsure, and deeply human. "You've gone viral," Lily said, placing the newspaper gently in front of her. Margaret looked at it, then looked away. "I don't even know what that means. It means the world knows about you now, and they're listening." "I'm not sure I want them to." Lily tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because I'm not who they think I am," Margaret whispered. "I'm not brave or talented. I'm just someone who's been quiet too long." Lily reached across the table and held her hand. "But that's what makes your voice so powerful. People heard your truth, and they needed it." Meanwhile, in a sleek office building in the city, the woman in the dark blazer was on a conference call. Her name was Evelyn Shaw, a high-level executive at a global media network. Known for discovering untapped talent, Evelyn had a sharp eye and a sharper mind. She had built stars from silence, and now her sights were on Margaret. "She's the kind of story that writes itself," Evelyn said to her team. "A forgotten voice, a surprise performance, raw emotion. It's authentic. The world's hungry for that. Find out everything you can, and get her on board." Her assistant nodded. "Should we reach out directly?" "Not yet," Evelyn said. "We do this carefully, respectfully. We're not just offering a contract. We're offering a legacy." Back in town, Derek had changed. Not in the dramatic, movie-style way. There were no grand gestures. But there was something different in his eyes. A softness. A thoughtfulness. He volunteered to help clean the old choir room at the reopened music center. He started reading books on music theory. And every afternoon he showed up to the library, just to sit near Margaret to listen. At first she was unsure of his presence. But over time his silence began to feel like support. "Why do you keep coming?" she finally asked one day. "Because I'm trying to learn," he said simply. "Not just music, but how to be better." Margaret looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "Then sit up straight," she said. "Your posture is terrible." The town's new community arts center opened 2 weeks later. It wasn't fancy. Paint still chipped from the walls, and the old stage squeaked when you walked on it. But it was filled with warmth, laughter, voices tuning up, and at the heart of it stood Margaret, She had accepted the role to lead the choir, though she insisted on calling it a group of voices. Instead, she didn't like the word leader. She just wanted to guide. Children, teenagers, and even adults came to be part of it. Some couldn't sing in tune. Some were shy. Some had voices louder than they needed to be. But Margaret treated them all with equal care. A song isn't about being perfect, she told them. It's about being honest. And when we sing together, we share that honesty. The first rehearsal was a mess. People forgot lyrics. Someone sneezed during a solo. The pianist kept missing keys. But Margaret smiled the whole time. Because for the first time in years, she felt alive. Evelyn Shaw watched from afar. Her team had sent a representative to attend that rehearsal undercover. They recorded it discreetly, sent back notes, even brought back a short clip. Evelyn watched the video late at night in her penthouse office. There was Margaret, standing in front of a group of people of all ages, guiding them gently. Her voice, rising, not above theirs, but with them. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and sighed. "We're not selling a voice," she whispered. "We're showing the world that broken things can still sing." She picked up her phone. It's time. Set. The meeting. Margaret had no idea what was coming. Her days were busy now, filled with music and new faces. She taught voice exercises in the mornings, helped organize sheet music in the afternoons, and shared tea with Lily and Derek in the evenings. She hadn't thought much about the internet, or the video. She hadn't checked the views or followed the comments. She didn't know that celebrities had shared her song, or that a famous singer had posted, "This woman's voice holds more truth than most albums today." She didn't know that she had become a symbol for something bigger, but she would soon. On a rainy Thursday morning, a black car pulled up. In front of the library, a woman stepped out. Tall, poised, dressed in a sleek coat. Evelyn Shaw. She walked into the library with quiet confidence. Lily noticed her first and stood up quickly. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I'm here to see Margaret." Lily hesitated. "Is she expecting you?" "No," Evelyn smiled. "But I think she'll want to hear what I have to say." Margaret was in the back sorting through sheet music. When Evelyn approached, she didn't recognize her. "Hello?" Margaret said politely. "You don't know me?" Evelyn began. "But I know you. Or rather, I've heard you." Margaret stood up slowly. "I'm sorry, are you from one of those news stations?" "No," Evelyn said. "I'm not here to interview you. I'm here to offer you something." Margaret frowned. "Go on." Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a contract. Not just any contract, but an offer to record, to perform, to tour, if she wished. Everything handled, everything respected. She would never be forced into anything. She would have full control. Margaret opened the folder, scanned the pages, and slowly closed it again. "You want me to become famous?" "No," Evelyn said softly. "I want you to become heard. On your terms." Margaret looked out the window. For years she had been forgotten, and now the world wanted her. But was that what she wanted? She wasn't sure. Later that night, she sat by the window again, tea in hand, rain tapping gently on the glass. She thought about the voices in the choir, about Derek's quiet determination, Lily's unwavering belief, and the laughter of children who had once been too shy to sing aloud. Maybe this was enough. Or maybe her voice had more places to go. The next day, Margaret met with Evelyn again. She returned the folder, but this time she added something else, a sheet of music, a song she had written herself. Not for the world, just for her. "If we do this," she said, "we do it my way. No lights, no makeup, no pretending, just the music, just the truth." Evelyn smiled. Deal. But what Margaret didn't know was that not everyone was happy about her rising voice. A former choir director from a nearby town, someone who once held the spotlight Margaret now stood under, watched her videos with clenched fists and a bitter heart. He was about to make sure that the world didn't forget his name either, and he was willing to do anything to silence hers. Shadows in the spotlight. The days that followed were unlike anything Margaret had ever imagined. She had spent most of her life in the shadows, quiet places where she could think, hum, and remember without interruption. But now people knew her name. Not just in town, but across cities, countries, even oceans. Strangers wrote letters to her, pouring out their hearts. Some told her how her song reminded them of their grandmother. Others said they listened to her lullaby every night to sleep. One letter simply read, "Your voice saved me." Margaret had never wanted fame, but something about this was different. It wasn't about flashing lights or crowds screaming her name. It was about connection, about the invisible thread that tied her voice to someone else's wound. And in that quiet exchange, sound for healing, she found her purpose. Her agreement with Evelyn was simple. No gimmicks, no auto-tune, no makeover montages. They would record in the church down the street, where the wooden beams echoed every breath with warmth. The first session began with Margaret singing the same lullaby from the talent show. One take. No edits. Evelyn stood at the back of the church, her eyes shimmering. She had built entire careers from manufactured stars. But this was real. This was what the world had forgotten it needed. But beyond the warm glow of Margaret's growing success, another story was quietly unfolding. His name was Calvin Lewis. Once, he had been a celebrated choir director in a prestigious academy, just 3 towns away. His performances had won awards. His students had gone on to sing on big stages, and Calvin had basked in the glory of being the man who shaped voices. But then budgets were cut. Schools changed. Priorities shifted, and Calvin was quietly pushed aside. Younger, fresher faces took his place. The attention he had once commanded disappeared like smoke. Bitterness replaced pride. And then one morning, while scrolling through social media with a chipped mug of coffee in his hand, he saw her, Margaret, singing a lullaby. Raw, untrained, imperfect, and adored. He couldn't believe it. How could the world celebrate someone like her, someone who hadn't been in the industry, who didn't know vocal control or formal composition? Rage twisted in his chest. He watched her interviews with clenched teeth. Every humble word she spoke sounded to him like mockery, like someone who had stumbled into something sacred without earning it. Calvin decided he needed to remind the world what real talent looked like, and if he had to destroy Margaret's rising voice to do it, so be it. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her rehearsals at the Community Arts Center. Each day, more people joined the choir. Teenagers who had never sung before. Elderly men who remembered singing in church decades ago. Even little children, holding their parents' hands, learning to sing their first notes. It wasn't perfect. It was beautiful. "Remember," Margaret would say, "we don't sing to impress. We sing to connect." One day, she introduced a new song, one she had written during her quiet years. It was a song about loss, memory, and the courage to begin again. The lyrics were simple, but the melody held deep ache. The choir listened in silence, many wiping their eyes before they even began to sing. Derek, who had once mocked her, now sang with such honesty that Margaret often paused just to listen to him. "You've come far," she told him. He looked down. "Thanks to you." As Margaret's influence grew, Evelyn suggested they hold a small live performance. Nothing flashy, just an intimate concert in the town square. No tickets, no press boxes, just music under the stars. Margaret agreed, but only if the choir could perform with her. "I will never stand on stage alone again," she said. "They gave me my voice back. I won't leave them behind." Evelyn admired her integrity. "Then we'll do it your way." Flyers were printed. Chairs were arranged. The local baker donated pastries for the crowd. The flower shop offered decorations. Even the fire department volunteered to help with lighting. The town was alive with excitement, but Calvin had already made his move. He had sent anonymous letters to media outlets, filled with lies, claims that Margaret had stolen music, that she had a dark past she was hiding. that her sudden fame was a publicity stunt manufactured by Evelyn's company. He forged documents, doctored images, sent them with poison-tipped words, meant to infect public opinion. At first, no one paid attention. But the internet doesn't sleep. And by the night before the performance, the rumors had started to surface. Is Margaret's voice really hers? Shocking past exposed. The truth behind the choir woman's fame. A fake? An angel with secrets? Margaret was in her kitchen preparing tea when Lily burst in, phone in hand, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said. Margaret took the phone and read quietly. The room felt colder now. Her hands trembled slightly. "Do you believe them?" she asked Lily. "Of course not," Lily said without hesitation. "But others might." Margaret sat down. "I knew this wouldn't last. I knew it was too good. Don't say that. People love you. This is someone trying to silence your truth." Margaret looked out the window. "And what if they succeed?" Lily knelt beside her. "Then we sing louder." The next morning, Evelyn called. "Don't panic," she said. "I've already sent legal notices. We're tracing the source. And every outlet that shared this garbage will be forced to retract. We'll clear your name." Margaret nodded slowly. "Thank you." But even as she hung up, the doubt lingered. It wasn't about the lies. It was the reminder that people can be cruel, especially when you start shining. She hadn't asked for this. She had simply followed a melody back to life. And now the world wanted to rip it away. That night she arrived at the town square just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The stage had been set. The chairs were full. Families, elders, children, all waiting. There were news vans too. People with cameras, microphones, questions. "Do you have anything to say about the recent rumors? Is it true you were banned from performing in the past? How do you respond to claims of musical fraud?" Margaret took a deep breath, then stepped up to the microphone. Her choir stood behind her, quiet but strong. She looked out at the crowd. The whispers, the judgment, and beyond them, faces filled with hope. "I've heard the stories," she said, into the mic. "I've read the headlines. I know not everyone believes I belong here." She paused. "But I am here." A hush fell over the square. Not because I chased fame. Not because I fooled anyone. I'm here because one day a young woman named Lily told me I should come watch a talent show. And when someone signed me up as a joke, I found the courage to sing. She looked back at Derek, who nodded silently. "I've made mistakes in my life. I've suffered losses. I've forgotten how to live. But the one thing I've never done is lie about my voice. It is mine. It is flawed. It is old. But it is real." The crowd remained silent. "So tonight, if you still wish to hear me, I'll sing." Then she turned, nodded to the choir, and began. The first notes rose slowly, tender and honest. The choir joined in. Harmonies filled the air like wind through trees, and the town square changed. The questions faded. The lights softened. And once, again, Margaret's voice reminded everyone what it meant to feel. But in a car parked just beyond the square, Calvin sat watching, furious. He had failed. But he wasn't done yet. Not by far. Louder than the lies. The final note of the song hung in the air like a whisper from the soul. It lingered for one sacred moment before dissolving into the breeze that swept gently across the town square. Margaret lowered her hands, her breath shallow, her heart full. Behind her, the choir remained still, eyes glistening. They had poured everything they had into the performance. Not to impress, not to win, but to remind the world of something deeper, something people often forget in the noise of everyday life. Then came the applause. But it wasn't like last time. This one was different. It wasn't just a reaction. It was a declaration, a fierce, standing, thundering statement. That they believed her, that they felt her, that the rumors, the noise, the doubt, it had all been drowned out by the purity of what they had just heard. Margaret didn't cry. Not then. But something warm bloomed quietly in her chest. A knowing. a piece. She had done what she came to do. Not just sing, not just lead a choir, but reclaim a life that had once slipped through her fingers like sand. When she stepped down, from the stage, reporters surrounded her again. But this time their questions were softer, respectful, and she didn't need to speak. The music had already answered everything. Evelyn met her at the edge of the square. The woman who had once been all business now had her arms wide open. "You silenced the world, Margaret, and you didn't even raise your voice." Margaret smiled. "I just remembered who I was." But across town, Calvin was unraveling. He had thought the rumors would break her, that the doubt would eat away at her fragile confidence. He had seen it happen before, talent crushed by whisper campaigns, dreams torn apart by skepticism, but Margaret had done the impossible. She had sung through it, and worse, people had listened. He sat alone in his apartment, papers scattered, old music trophies buried in dust. The television played Margaret's concert on repeat, mocking him. With every flawless note, his hand trembled as he poured another drink. "They've forgotten me," he muttered. In a fit of rage, he hurled a photo frame across the room. Glass shattered. A picture of him standing on stage years ago, smiling, respected, clapping in front of a young choir, lay broken on the floor. He was spiraling, and no one knew. Meanwhile, Derek had become Margaret's quiet shadow. He arrived early to every rehearsal, stayed late to pack chairs, tuned the piano, organized sheet music, and even began helping teach the younger kids. People noticed, but Derek didn't care about being noticed. He cared about making things right. One evening, as the choir filed out after a long practice, Margaret sat on the bench outside the center, resting her feet. Derek sat beside her, holding 2 paper cups of hot cocoa. "You're not just here for the music," she said softly, accepting the drink. "I'm here because, when I messed up, you didn't throw me away," he replied. "You could have told me to leave. You could have shamed me in front of everyone. But that wouldn't have taught you anything," she said. "Shame doesn't grow anything, but grace does." Derek looked at her, then looked down. "You know, I want to teach music one day." Margaret smiled. "You already are." Evelyn was watching everything unfold. She had begun documenting Margaret's journey, not as a media production, but as a documentary from the heart. No scripts, no retakes, just real moments. She titled it, "The Woman Who Sang Anyway." She brought in a small crew, people who understood the sensitivity of the story. They captured choir rehearsals, town interactions, late-night tea conversations between Margaret and Lily, even quiet shots of Margaret walking alone through the cemetery where her husband and son were buried. In one scene, Margaret sat near their gravestones, whispering lyrics as if the wind would carry them upward. "I thought I'd never sing again," she said to the camera. "But maybe. I was never meant to stop. Just pause." But the piece didn't last long. Calvin had one final move. He hacked into a media submission account and sent out an audio file. It was a manipulated clip. Margaret's voice, distorted, off-key, layered with mistakes she never made. He labeled it the raw truth. Some media outlets bit the bait. Stories began to appear. Was Margaret's voice edited all along? Leaked recording reveals flaws? It wasn't as loud as the first rumor wave, but it was enough to create a ripple. Lily found Margaret in the middle of a rehearsal. Her face was pale again. "It's happening again," she whispered, handing over her phone. Margaret listened to the clip. It was awful. Not just because it sounded wrong, but because it was meant to humiliate, to undo everything she had built. She closed her eyes. But this time, she didn't feel fear. She felt resolve. 2 days later, Margaret held a press gathering, not flashy, just the town hall. Local reporters, music bloggers, and a few national outlets attended. Margaret stood behind the podium with no notes. "Some of you have heard a new recording," she began. "You've asked if it's me. It's not. But even if it was, it wouldn't change anything." People leaned in. "I've never claimed to be perfect. I'm not here because of flawless technique or perfect pitch. I'm here because one day I decided not to be silent anymore." She looked around the room. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. This world will always try to measure you, question you, shrink you. But if you know your truth, if you hold it gently and fiercely, no lie can take it from you. Cameras clicked. Flashes went off. But Margaret stood still, unshaken. I don't sing to be famous. I sing to be free. The story made headlines again, but this time the media wasn't questioning her. They were quoting her, praising her strength, celebrating her grace. Evelyn added that moment as the opening scene in the documentary. Fade in. A woman in her late 70s. Quiet eyes. Firm voice. I sing to be free. Back in his apartment, Calvin watched the footage again and again. And, for the first time, he cried. Not because he was angry, but because he realized he had been trying to bury someone else's voice to make peace with the silence in his own. He turned off the TV, and for the first time in years, he walked to his old piano, sat down, and played. At the choir center, Margaret was preparing for their next performance. This one would be bigger, held at a nearby city's auditorium. An invitation from the mayor had arrived, asking if Margaret and her choir would perform for a gathering of local leaders and educators. But instead of choosing a grand anthem or something dramatic, Margaret handed everyone a copy of a brand new song. What is this? Derek asked. Margaret smiled. I wrote it last night. It's called We Sang Anyway. The melody was gentle, the lyrics simple, but the message unmistakable. We were told we were too broken, too small, too late. We were asked to stop, to hide, to wait. But we stood, and we sang. Not because we were brave, but because we needed to, because we had to, because somewhere deep down, we knew. The world needed it too. They rehearsed it every day for a week, not because they wanted it to be perfect, but because they wanted it to be honest. And on the night of the performance, as lights dimmed and the choir took their place under the glow of the auditorium stage, Margaret stood in the center. One hand held her sheet, the other pressed gently against her heart. The conductor raised his hands. The music began, and Margaret sang. The song that changed everything. The auditorium was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness or hesitation, but the kind that wraps around you, holds you gently, and commands your full attention. It was the silence before something sacred begins, and Margaret felt it settle over her shoulders like a warm shawl as the music swelled gently into life. Her choir stood behind her, young and old, nervous and hopeful, all drawn together by something stronger than talent. Truth. The first notes. We Sang Anyway bloomed softly across the stage, delicate as dawnlight. Then Margaret opened her mouth and the first words left her lips. It wasn't just singing anymore. It was testimony, a quiet confession from every soul that had ever been, silenced, dismissed, overlooked. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from honesty. And that tremble became part of the song's power. Every breath was a memory. Every lyric, a wound healed. The audience leaned forward, some clutched tissues. Others held hands. Some didn't even realize they were crying. The choir joined in on the chorus, their voices rising like a tide. Imperfect, uneven, but beautiful in their unity. They were not trying to be the best choir. They were trying to be real. And in doing so, they created something unforgettable. When the final note floated into the air and gently faded, there was stillness. Margaret closed her eyes, and then, like a wave crashing after a long drawback, came the applause. Not polite, not predictable, but thunderous. People stood, tears in their eyes. Some clapped until their hands ached. Others simply stood frozen, changed. The mayor himself walked up onto the stage with misty eyes and took the mic. Tonight, he said, we didn't just witness a performance, we witnessed a reminder. That music, at its core, is not about fame or perfection, it's about courage, connection, truth. And thanks to Margaret and her choir, we've all remembered that. He turned to her. Thank you. not just for the music, but for reminding us how to listen. After the show, the auditorium was buzzing. People came up to Margaret one after another, some young, some elderly, some who had never been touched by music before. One woman whispered, "I haven't sung since my husband died. Tonight I remembered why I used to." A teenage boy holding his little sister's hand said, "Your song made me feel safe, like it was okay to cry." Even reporters were speechless, asking questions with gentleness, not frenzy. Evelyn stood nearby, not interfering, just watching, with quiet pride. Later, in the green room, Margaret sat down, finally alone for a moment. Her hands were trembling, not from nerves, but from something deeper. Release. It felt as if decades of silence had finally been lifted. She thought of her husband, her son, of the piano in the old house, of the broken records that used to play lullabies when no one was listening. And, for the first time in years, she didn't feel forgotten. She felt whole. In the weeks that followed, the documentary The Woman Who Sang Anyway was released. No one expected what happened next. It went viral, not just online but everywhere. Streaming platforms fought for rights. News shows aired clips of Margaret speaking softly about her journey. Classrooms played her story to teach students about perseverance and honesty. Music schools invited her to speak, not as a celebrity but as a mentor. But Margaret never let it consume her. She declined most interviews. She turned down performance contracts in big cities. She didn't care for red carpets or bright lights. "I've had my stage," she told Evelyn. "Now I want to build stages for others." And she did. With help from donations that poured in from around the world, Margaret helped open 3 new community music centers, 1 in her town, 2 in neighboring ones. Centers for those who never thought their voice mattered, for those who had been told they weren't good enough, for those who sang anyway. Derek became a full-time music teacher at one of those centers. He designed programs for kids who struggled, with confidence just like he once had. He always told them, music isn't about sounding perfect, it's about showing up. And on the wall of every room hung a framed quote from Margaret, "Sing anyway." Lily, the librarian who had once casually mentioned a talent show, now ran a town-wide initiative to connect art with healing. Every Friday she held story and song nights, where people read poems, shared memories, and yes, sometimes sang, even off-key, even shaking. It didn't matter. What mattered was the courage. And every time Margaret walked into the library, she was greeted not with silence, but with light. As for Calvin, he stayed quiet for some time, but eventually one evening he knocked on the door of Margaret's home. She opened it, surprised. He looked thinner, tired, not angry, just tired. "I was wrong," he said. Margaret nodded slowly. "I know. I tried to silence you. I know that too. And you forgave me anyway." She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. He did. They drank tea in silence for a long time. Then Margaret handed him a small sheet of music. "I'm working on a new piece," she said. "It's called Grace." He studied it for a moment, then looked up. "You wrote this?" "Yes." He hesitated. "May I play it?" She smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask." And in that small living room, once filled with dust and silence, a piano sang again. Not just with notes, but with healing. Years passed, and Margaret's name became more than a headline. It became a symbol, not of a viral moment, but of quiet bravery, of truth sung aloud, of resilience wrapped in melody. On her 80th birthday, a concert was held in the same square where she had first surprised the world. This time, not as a performer, but as a guest of honor. The choir sang. We sang anyway without her. But she stood among them, a simple woman, who reminded the world that even the forgotten can shine, even the silenced can sing. And sometimes, the softest voice becomes the loudest echo.